Well, thank you for the opportunity to present and be a part of this panel and symposium. I come at this trained as a sociologist, and I'm a survey researcher. So most of what I can provide is good descriptive analysis of what has been and what is currently the state, and maybe make some predictions for future trends or trajectories. My research focuses primarily on politically oriented civic organizations, so the civic engagement of communities and populations. And so today the focus is on Muslim Americans and civic engagement. And this topic interests me. Let's see. I'll do it this way.
I think you have to do it manually.
Let's. Which one would I press? Nope. Not that one. That's gonna be funny. Huh? Cool. I'll do the swipe. Oh no, now it's working. Okay. So Muslim Americans in civil society, as I did my research on politically oriented civic organizations, one of the subpopulations that I spoke with was imams and other Muslim civic leaders who were interested in sort of the involvement of Muslim Americans in these broad-based civic organizations. And there were sort of two focuses of their interest. One was sort of the internal development of Muslim American communities in communities around the U.S., and then also the external ties that Muslim Americans would have with the broader population. And so part of it was the idea of becoming civically engaged would develop civic leaders and leaders within the Muslim American community. And also, it provided a vehicle to address social concerns that were particular to Muslim Americans, and what are vehicles and ways to address the concerns of their community. But then also, it was this idea of promoting civic engagement was an opportunity to build bridges with the broader community and be involved broadly within the community, with ultimately of this idea of bridging social differences. So you have these internal desires of wanting to promote civic engagement, and also the external benefits that are there. And the field of organizations that I analyze is called faith-based community organizing. And what I was beginning to see is, okay, well, this is one vehicle, this is one slice of civil society and civic engagement, is this idea of faith-based community organizing. And the way that it's described is basically they're local interfaith coalitions. Coalitions of primarily religious institutions like congregations, mosques, synagogues, but also like parent-teacher organizations or local unions or other neighborhood association type organizations that come together to address issues of common concern. And so this addressing issues of shared concern is that these coalitions aren't these things that just pop up for like one issue related agenda and then dissolve after that voting ballot is done, but instead they come together as enduring coalitions that want to say, okay, what are the sort of the ongoing social concerns of our community that we collectively want to address, and then once we address that issue, we'll pivot to the next issue. So whether it's healthcare or education or whatever the salient issue is, they will address it collectively. And the idea is that these coalitions provide a way to build power. So it tends to be more marginalized communities, people who have lower wealth and other types of resources. By collectively coming together and pulling from multiple strands of the community, they can build power through their numbers instead of necessarily through their financial wealth. And then also, as sort of a sub-theme of these coalitions, is developing leaders. So again, you have marginalized, lower resource communities. This provides a venue to develop leaders within the community. So the idea is to raise up people within the community, to promote them as leaders, give them experience being leaders within the coalition that they can take back to their communities. And another key aspect of this is the theme of bridging social differences. So these are highly diverse organizations, both racial diversity, religious diversity, class diversity, is exhibited in these organizations much more than we'd see in the general population. And finally, the other component of this is strengthening faith communities. So their objective is not just to strengthen the coalition, but by developing leaders within the coalitions, they're leaders of the particular faith communities. So faith communities see it not only as a way to develop leaders, but also to strengthen their own faith community, whether it be their local congregation or mosque or synagogue, through being involved in these coalitions. So this is faith-based community organizing. Let's see. Oops. I'll pass this. Okay. So how does this fit into Muslim Americans and civic engagement? So the really interesting thing, and this is more talking with Rami Nashishraba from the Nashishibi from Iman, and also Dustin Cron from San Francisco, who's working with one of these organizations. And he said one of the key strategic elements that they discovered was a lot of the issues that were being confronted by Muslim Americans were also being faced by other communities within the U.S. And so there's these cross-cutting social issues where, rather than independently addressing them, collaborating together with like-minded people. So one of the topics is immigration enforcement, is one of these cross-cutting social issues that isn't just affecting Muslim Americans, but it's affecting other populations within the U.S. Another part would be mass incarceration. Another cross-cutting issue would be mass surveillance. And, oops, how did I do that? And then racial and religious profiling. So these are just four, but these are some of the four most significant ones where identifying social issues that cross over multiple populations in the U.S. And so this was sort of an opportunity for collaboration outside of the Muslim American population to other populations in the U.S. And so some of the ones that I highlight are one of the more high-profile collaborations, but these are just sort of snapshots of other things that are happening throughout the U.S. So this is in Chicago, the May Day immigration rally, which had a large contingent of Muslim American engagement and involvement, along with other with Latino organizations and other faith-based organizations that participated in this particular rally. Then in New York, the protesting of the stop and frisk mandate that was going on. And again, if you just look at these at face value, you'd say, well, these aren't Muslim issues. This isn't necessarily unique to Muslim American, or this isn't a Muslim related protest. But the subtext of it is that these are issues that are facing the Muslim American community, but also facing the wider population. And so they were opportunities to collaborate and to engage with these issues collectively. And then finally, in the San Francisco Bay Area, blocking of mass surveillance. So in Oakland, California, there is money that was going to be brought in to create these mass surveillance. And not only the Muslim American community, but also the Black Lives Matter movement worked together to address this issue of mass surveillance, blocking the mass surveillance. So the role of philanthropy. So also going on at the same time concurrently with greater Muslim American civic engagement and collaboration was philanthropy, stepping in and saying, well, how do we fund more grassroots activity within Muslim American communities? And one is the One Nation Foundation, which was the best way to describe it is it's a national organization that was setting up all these local level partnerships, of partnering with community foundations with the explicit focus of engaging Muslim Americans with the broader community to address issues of local concern. And so they were set up in New York, Baltimore, Atlanta, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Tacoma. There's, I think, about 12 different cities where these partnerships were set up and to sort of set in motion these collaborations. And the main thing was to promote interorganizational collaboration, so these coalitions of organizations. So where my research comes into this, and this is, again, right at the same time, so the data that I have sort of gives you a snapshot of what was going on. And I conducted a national study of community organizing coalitions, and I did this in 2011. And there was also a previous wave done in 1999, which provides a baseline. And what I'm going to focus on today is Muslim involvement in these coalitions. And what's important to note is that in 1999, there were 0 mosques that we're aware of that were involved. 0 Muslim board members that were on the boards of these coalitions, and 1 Muslim organizer. So the baseline was pretty low, and so I'm going to then go in to show sort of how has Muslim involvement in this field of organizations expanded in the last 12 years. So this is one example in Indianapolis is Congregation Action Network, which is one example of one of the coalitions in this study. To give you a quick sense of this, the main thing to focus on is the member organizations. These are the churches, the mosques, the synagogues, the neighborhood associations that participate in these coalitions. And so the issue areas that IndyCan is working on is living wages, immigrant rights, and the criminal justice system. So this is just one snapshot of one coalition. And in the study, there's 189 coalitions where I did basically a survey of what are all the activities and finances, where do you get your funding from, looking at their leadership, looking at the policy wins that they've achieved. And then also what I gathered was extensive demographic data on all their member organizations and all of their board members and all of their staff. So like with the board members, getting information on their gender, age, race, immigrant status, their education level, their income level. So basically any type of demographic information I was collecting on them. To give you a sense of the scope of data that was collected, 178 coalitions participated in the study. And so I have data on 4,145 of the member organizations, and then demographic data on 2,939 of the board members, and then of data on 628 of the paid staff. Now these organizations are heavily volunteer-oriented, so the number of paid staff is generally small. They rely heavily on volunteer leaders, primarily the board members, who run sort of the events and programming of the coalitions. So then to give you a sense of, well, where is Muslim civic engagement within this map of coalitions around the country? And the main stat is that 26% of these coalitions have some sort of Muslim engagement, Muslim involvement. Now remember, in 1999, it was basically 0. And so now in 2011, the orange dots represent a coalition that either has a Muslim member organization, so a mosque or Islamic center, or a Muslim board member, or a Muslim staff member. And so what's interesting is not only is it 26%, but they're pretty much spread out. So it isn't all concentrated like in Dearborn, Michigan, or in other places, but it's actually, most of these organizations will have one mosque as a member organization. So the percentages might be somewhat small, but they're actually very spread out throughout the country. And to give it a little bit more, break it down of Muslim representation, so if you think about the percentage of congregations in the US that are mosques, it's approximately 0.6%, and I'm going to use a comparison of evangelical churches. 48% of congregations in the US are evangelical churches. In terms of the percentage of faith-based community organizing member organizations that are mosques, 1.3%. So they're, in a sense, mosques are overrepresented in this field, almost double or more than double. And you compare that to evangelical churches, and only 4.9% of the member organizations are evangelical churches. Then coalitions with at least one member organization, Muslim member organization, is 20%. And then this is another interesting statistic, is that at least one percentage of coalitions with at least one Muslim and one Jewish member organization is 17%. And then coalitions with at least one Muslim board member is 19%. And then coalitions with at least one, or number of paid organizers who are Muslim is 9. Now again, I say this all in the context of in 1999, almost across the board, it was just 0 involvement. And so there's a big boost over the last 12 years. And the final statistic is that coalitions with Muslim representation is 26%. So if of this entire field, over a quarter have some sort of Muslim engagement in this activity. So then in terms of like, well, how does this intersect with religion and racial and religious differences, and how do they navigate these differences? So one of the questions I asked was, to what extent the extent to which racial differences are explicitly discussed or in your meetings, or complicate your planning meetings, or prolong your planning meetings. And so I asked that question in regards to race and in regards to religion. Now, as an organization increased in racial diversity, they talked about race more often, talked about racial differences. Racial differences complicated their meetings and prolonged their meetings. In terms of religious diversity, as the organizations become more religiously diverse, they didn't necessarily talk about religious differences anymore, and religious differences didn't complicate meetings or prolong the planning meetings. And the key sort of point in this is that as the groups expanded beyond just the Christian membership base, they didn't necessarily talk about, well, how are Christians different from Muslims, or how are Muslims different from Jewish people, because that didn't really help them move forward in addressing social concerns. And instead, whereas maybe they would talk about racial differences, because what's the experience of an African American in the public school system versus a white person in the public school system? And what's the asterisk there, where there's a couple groups that's mentioned complications, and that was when there was a Muslim and Jewish board member or member organization. That's where it tended to complicate planning meetings. But on the whole, the increased religious diversity didn't lead to greater complexities of navigating differences. In harnessing religion, I'm going to, move through this. The last thing with summary is that faith-based community organizing, the last part I'm going to talk about is Muslim civic engagement. It's just an opportunity for them, a grassroots effort to address social concerns, develop civic leaders, strengthen Muslim institutions, and cultivate external ties with the broader population. So, thank you very much.